January 1943. The basement of the Univermag department store in Stalingrad. The air is thick with the smell of unwashed bodies, gangrene, and fear. Outside, the temperature is minus 30 degrees. Inside, General Friedrich Paulus, commander of the German 6th Army, is holding a radio message from Adolf Hitler. It's the middle of the night. The Russians are literally a few hundred yards away. Their tanks are crushing the German barricades. Paulus reads the message. It informs him that he has been promoted to the rank of General Field Marshal. Field Marshal. It sounds like an honor, but Paulus knows exactly what it is. In the history of the Prussian and German military, no Field Marshal has ever surrendered to the enemy. Not once. Hitler isn't sending congratulations. He's telling Paulus that he's expected to commit suicide. He's demanding that Paulus shoot himself rather than be captured. How did it come to this? How did the commander of the most powerful army on the Eastern Front end up trapped in a rat-infested basement, staring at a pistol, paralyzed by an order that sentenced 250,000 men to death? Today, on WW2 Battlegrounds, we're going inside the Kessel, the Cauldron, to analyze the command failure that broke the back of the Wehrmacht. To understand the tragedy of Stalingrad, you have to understand the man at the center of it, Friedrich Paulus. Paulus wasn't a hard-bitten frontline warrior like Rommel or Manstein. He was a staff officer, a planner, meticulous, intelligent, obsessed with maps and logistics. He was the perfect second in command, but he had never commanded an army in the field. Before Stalingrad, he was a man who believed in rules. He believed in the chain of command, and above all, he believed in his oath of loyalty to Adolf Hitler. By November 1942, the German 6th Army had battered its way into the city of Stalingrad. They controlled 90% of the rubble. They had reached the Volga River, but they were exhausted. Then on November 19th, the trap snapped shut. The Soviet Red Army launched Operation Uranus. They didn't attack the Germans in the city. They attacked the flanks outside the city, held by Romanian, Hungarian, and Italian troops. These units were poorly equipped, lacking anti-tank weapons. The Soviets smashed through them like a hammer through glass. In just 4 days, 2 massive Soviet spearheads met at the town of Kalak. Behind the German lines, the 6th Army was encircled. This was the critical moment. Inside the cauldron, there were between 250,000 and 300,000 men. They still had fuel. They still had ammunition. They were a coiled spring, ready to snap back. If they turned around and attacked immediately, they could break out. They could save the army. Paulus radioed Hitler for permission to withdraw. His corps commanders were screaming at him to move. "We must break out now!" they shouted. But from his headquarters in East Prussia, thousands of miles away, Hitler looked at a map and said no. He designated Stalingrad a Festung, a fortress. The 6th Army was ordered to stand fast. Where the German soldier sets his foot, Hitler declared, he remains. Why did Hitler think a surrounded army could survive in the middle of a Russian winter? Because of a lie told by Reichsmarschall Hermann Goering. When the encirclement happened, Hitler asked Goering, "Can the Luftwaffe supply the 6th Army from the air?" Let's look at the math. Poor logistics. To survive, just to keep the soldiers from starving and the guns firing, the 6th Army needed a minimum of 500 tons of supplies every single day. 500 tons. Food, fuel, medical supplies, ammunition. Goering, eager to please Hitler and regain his prestige, didn't check the weather reports. He didn't check the number of available transport planes. He just puffed out his chest and said, "My Luftwaffe can do it." It was a fantasy, a lethal fantasy. The reality was catastrophic. The Germans didn't have enough Ju-52 transport planes. The weather was abysmal: blizzards, fog, icing conditions. The Soviet anti-aircraft fire was intense. On their best day, the Luftwaffe managed maybe 300 tons. On average, they delivered about 90 tons a day. On some days, 0. Imagine being a soldier in the Kessel. You're eating 1 slice of bread a day. You're boiling leather belts to make soup. You're watching the sky, praying for a transport plane. When a canister finally drops, you run to open it, hoping for ammunition or morphine, and instead you find condoms, or piles of right-footed boots, or spice. This actually happened. The logistical system was so broken that useless supplies were being flown into a starvation zone. The air bridge was a lie that justified the stand-fast order. As long as Hitler believed the army could be supplied, he wouldn't allow them to retreat. And Paulus, the staff officer who trusted the system, believed the promise until it was too late. This brings us to the psychological core of the disaster. Why didn't Paulus just disobey? His subordinate, General Walter von Seydlitz, Kurzbach, was furious. He argued that their duty to the German people and to their soldiers overrode their duty to Hitler. He practically begged Paulus, "Ignore the radio. Order the breakout! History will vindicate you." But Paulus froze. He was a man who had spent his entire career following orders perfectly. To him, an order from the Führer was not just a military instruction, it was a moral absolute. The tragedy reached its peak in mid-December. The German army outside the ring, led by Field Marshal Erich Manstein, and launched a rescue attempt called Operation Winter Storm. Manstein's tanks fought through hell. They got within 30 miles of the Stalingrad pocket. The desperate soldiers inside could hear the rumble of the German artillery. They could see the flashes of the guns on the horizon at night. Manstein radioed Paulus. "Break out now!" Thunderclap. That was the code word. "Attack to the southwest and link up with me!" This was the last chance. The door was opening for a split second, but Paulus hesitated. He looked at his fuel gauges. His tanks had fuel for maybe 15 miles, not 30. But more importantly, he looked at his orders. Hitler had not authorized a retreat from the city. Hitler had said, "Hold Stalingrad." If Paulus broke out, he would be disobeying a direct order. He would be abandoning the fortress. So he did nothing. He stayed put. He cited logistics. He cited the lack of fuel. But the truth was, he lacked the moral courage to defy the dictator. Manstein's tanks were forced to turn back. The door slammed shut forever. By January 1943, the Sixth Army was no longer a fighting force. It was a mass of starving, freezing skeletons. Discipline collapsed. Men dropped dead while walking to the latrines. The wounded froze to death in the field hospitals because there was no fuel for the stoves. Cannibalism was reported. The Soviets launched their final offensive, slicing the German pocket in two. They captured the airfields. The last transport plane took off, leaving thousands of wounded men on the runway, screaming as the Soviet tanks rolled over them. We return to the basement of the Univermag department store. January 30th, a Hitler sends the promotion message. General Field Marshal Paulus. It's the most cynical manipulation imaginable. The Hitler knows the end is hours away. He wants a martyr. He wants a headline. The Sixth Army fights to the last bullet, and its commander dies with his troops. He's trying to bribe Paulus into suicide with a title. Paulus stares at the message. He looks at his staff officers. He looks at his pistol. For the first time in his life, Friedrich Paulus disobeys Adolf Hitler. He says to his aide, "I have no intention of shooting myself for this Bohemian corporal." The next morning, January 31st, a young Soviet lieutenant kicks open the door of the basement. He finds the newly promoted field marshal lying on a cot, unshaven, defeated. Paulus stands up and surrenders. When the news reached Hitler, he went into a rage. He wasn't angry about the 250,000 men lost. He was angry that Paulus hadn't killed himself. He ranted to his secretaries. The man should have shot himself, just as the old commanders who threw themselves on their swords when they saw their cause was lost. What is life? Life is the nation. The individual must die anyway. The surrender at Stalingrad was the psychological turning point of World War II. Before this, the German Wehrmacht seemed invincible. They had lost battles, sure, but they had never lost an entire army. They had never had a field marshal surrender. The myth of the Superman was broken. But the lesson here is about the danger of rigid command. Hitler tried to command a battle 2,000 kilometers away, refusing to listen to the commanders on the ground. He traded space for lives, and he lost both. It also raises the eternal question of military ethics. When is it right to disobey? If Paulus had disobeyed Hitler in November and broken out, he might have been court-martialed. He might have been executed for treason, but he would have saved 200,000 German soldiers. Instead, he followed orders. He kept his oath, and the result was total annihilation. The numbers are haunting. When the Sixth Army marched into Stalingrad, it was over 250,000 strong. By the time Paulus surrendered, about 91,000 soldiers were left alive to be taken prisoner. They were marched off into the Siberian snow. They were sent to gulags, mines, and labor camps. Of those 91,000 men who surrendered, only 5,000 ever came home. Think about that. The 5,000 out of 250,000. Paulus himself survived captivity. He eventually testified against the Nazi regime at the Nuremberg trials. He lived until 1957 in East Germany, but he died a broken man, forever known as the general who followed orders all the way to the grave. If you found this analysis compelling, hit that subscribe button. We're building a library of the war's most critical moments, and we want you with us. Here's a question I want you to answer in the comments. If you were Paulus, would you have disobeyed Hitler and ordered the breakout? Or is the chain of command absolute? It's not an easy question. Let me know what you think. Next time, we're heading to the Pacific to analyze the Battle of Midway, where 5 minutes of chaos changed the course of history. Until then, this is WW2 Battlegrounds.